Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 483. Top board games I wish I had never, ever been talked into playing.
Welcome, citizens, to Meeple Nation. Grab your favorite beverage, pull up a chair, warm up those dice, and join us at the game table as we discuss board games and the board gaming world. Each week, the hosts of Meeple Nation share their love for board games and the amazing memories that come from playing games with some very outstanding people. Let us now join our hosts in their natural habitat, the game table.
We are the hosts of Meeple Nation. I'm Nathan Howard.
I'm Dave Holliday.
I'm Logan Howard.
I'm Andy Holliday.
And I'm Douglas Stewart.
The Meeple Nation podcast is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. We love our Game Toppers, and we think you will too. If you are looking for a fantastic upgrade to your game room, go check out GameToppersLLC.com. You can look at their tables, their mats, their accessories. I guarantee you can find something there to make game night epic and amazing. Go check them out. GameToppersLLC.com.
So there I was on the internet, bored out of my gourd. And then I found it. MeepleNation.com. What an oasis on the internet. There were blogs. There were pictures. There were bios of some amazing people. There are links to episodes that go way back. How many, Dave?
482 back.
Plus. Yeah. Some way back old episodes when we
were young.
When we were younger.
When we, as in you?
Yeah, I guess so. But there's also a link to the Meeple Nation Patreon page, Patreon/Meeple_Nation, or there's a link on that webpage where you can go and choose to support the Meeple Nation podcast and help enhance this internet oasis.
Hey, we are the hosts of Meeple Nation. I'm Logan Howard.
I'm Andy Holliday.
I'm Douglas Stewart.
I'm Nathan Howard.
And I'm Dave Holliday.
And this week we are discussing top board games I wish I had never been talked into playing. I mean, a lot of the games on this list, going through it would be great games for other people. It's just circumstances, I think, determined a lot of it.
I think that's true. In fact, some of my games are some of the top games for some people I know.
Like Space, that's on my list, and it was an okay game until I was forced to play it for like a month and a half straight, and then it's there on my list of like, Space, never again.
Logan, you're supposed to give a spoiler alert before you start saying what's on your list.
He just started his list.
Spoiler alert! I wasn't
alert.
supposed to be here this week. I was supposed to be working or something, and so I don't have a list, and so there I started number 5, Space.
Well done, Logan. Space. All right, so my number 5 is one of Dave's favorite games, and that's Charterstone. It started out okay. I was enjoying my plays, our plays of Charterstone. It's a legacy game, and it was fun. But by the end, it was everything I could do to play that game and finish it. Not a particularly enjoyable experience, and I know at the end, like, oh, you have a game that you can play, and I'm thinking, there's no way in heck I'm playing that game.
Yeah. I was just reorganizing my shelves over here, trying to put certain shelves in alphabetical order, and came across, I have 2 copies of Charterstone in various stages of completion. Yeah, the one that's complete, I have no desire to play that ever again.
The one that would be incomplete, I'd have no desire to play that one again either.
I would be interested I have a recharge kit that I would be interested in recharging it. I'd love to get my wife to play it, and Ashley, my oldest daughter, because she really enjoyed the game. Ashley, Brent, and I played through it the first time, and we had a blast. I guess I think that still you play those legacy games, and it's like a certain group. So like Brent, Ashley, and I finished that game, and so that game has a little bit more meaning to me than if I was going to say, hey, the 5 of us, let's play this game in this state. And it's just like, that's.
With my experience with Charterstone, it was, like I said, it was a fairly positive experience. I mean, Richie was pretty much walking away with it for most of the game, and then Dave was actually able to rival him towards the end, but it got to where the end was just, it almost felt like it wasn't worth playing. Kind of gotten to where it was monotonous, kind of the same old gameplay every time, and it got kind of boring. It wasn't fresh anymore, and I think that's why.
I get that. the group that we were playing with, and Logan was kind of running away with the game. And I remember other people complaining, well, Logan's just going to do this over and over again and win. And so I'm like, well, we could stop him. Well, no, I want to do this. Okay, then Logan's going to do that, and Logan's going to run away with it. So, we can stop him or we can watch him win.
Well, it's funny because that's what a lot of people were complaining about the strategy I was taking, but I believe I won all of the games that we had. The engine I had at the beginning was okay. Obviously, it wasn't out of balance because I only won once. So, but it was a cool engine, and I guess that's why everybody thought it was overpowered. But maybe I just suck at the game, and that's why.
Well,
I would have to break out the box to see how many times I did win. It felt like I won quite a bit with Charterstone.
And that's Charterstone.
My number 5 is hopefully one that won't cause too many sparks to fly here at the table. This was one that you guys introduced to me it's been about 2 years ago, so it's been a while. And we haven't played it again for quite some time, but I kind of regret that I jumped into Folklore. And I put this one on the list because I actually think that Folklore is a really good game, but you guys had been playing it for some time prior to when I had joined. And I remember sitting down for that first session, went over the rules, I picked a character, and everyone was just like, okay, here, you can take a few perks and here's some coins, and all right, we're off, right? Like we'll get you caught up. And I sat through like 2 sessions of that game where everyone was doing like amazing things. Like honestly, I think Folklore is a good game because you guys were doing incredible stuff. And I was like walking over to like the weakest monster in the room and taking a couple swipes and maybe hitting something. And that was the extent of my experience. While you guys, and Richie in particular, like his character was unbelievably overpowered and his turns were taking 15 minutes. He's doing all these combos and taking whole waves of guys out and stuff. And I was just sitting back going, I don't know what's happening, but the balance of playtime, right? And the experience I was having at the table was much different than the experience you were all having at the table. And I really wish that I had been introduced to this game when everyone was starting it fresh. And so I regret that because at this point, my desire to play it is super low. And I think if I had been able to jump in on the ground floor, I think it's one I would have really, really enjoyed. So it kind of ruined it for me, but.
Kind of sounds like my experience with Shadows of Brimstone, where everybody's really good and my character was really slow. So everybody'd go into a room, they'd kill all the monsters, and then I'd make it into the room. And then everybody go to the next room, kill all the monsters, and I'd make it into the room. And it was just me following everybody behind. Yay, you go, guys.
He's our cheerleader.
Go fight, win.
I think with Shadows, we balanced it better by playing on a higher difficulty, so it fixed that issue. For slower characters, there's still things to do at the end of round of combat, despite Andy's best efforts.
Yeah, and he's an annihilator of the spawns for sure.
It helped with the slowness, but the thing that Doug's talking about, just the generally being able to do and just sitting here watching everybody else do all this incredible stuff while I'm
I think
not really.
I was rolling the weakest dice. I had the weakest weapons. I didn't have any coins. I didn't have anything to do. And my character was technically, I think, at level with you guys. I do think we had started a character at level, but the gearing and progression that way just hadn't taken place. So it didn't really work for me.
That's hard to do when someone comes in
It is
halfway through.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing, but the other thing is none of us had ever played that character, so we didn't really know what to give you, and you didn't know what to take with your perks and everything else. So I think there's a lot that played into that, and that's unfortunate you had.
I think it's just a cautionary tale, right? Like just don't do that in future. Don't do it again, right? So, lesson learned on that one. That's my number 5, Folklore. Nathan, what's your number 5?
So my number 5 is a similar story. Cooper Island. Andy was really excited to play this game. And so I show up at Andy's house, and you guys had just learned the game and had all kind of lost horribly. And you're like, okay, let's reset this and do it all over again. And Andy did a great job teaching me all the rules, teaching me everything. And then play began, and it was like I was playing a completely different game. And everybody else is just doing all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm listening to what Andy told me to do, and I'm doing stuff. I'm not getting stuff done. And so then the game ended, and I was like drastically behind. So I was like, okay, we got to try this again. But then, so we reset again and we tried it again. And I did exceptionally better the second time. It's one of those games that you have to learn.
Yeah.
And as you learn, you understand those concepts, you improve your skills. The only problem was that you guys also evolved. And so it was like fighting the Borg, right? I had adapted, but you guys had adapted better.
Resistance is futile,
Yeah.
Nathan.
We had an extra game
Yeah.
played to adapt a little bit our strategy. Yeah.
And it made a huge difference, right? I don't really dislike the game, but after the first experience, I was just like, man, this is ridiculous. And then I guess it's been long enough now that maybe if we redid it again, we played it again, we'd be all kind of more back on that same level, and it would be much
Probably.
more interesting to play it again. But yeah, that was definitely a game that I regretted playing.
Well, you will be assimilated.
Yes.
Dave, what was your number 5?
I'm a silver linings guy. So even when a game's bad, I try to walk away thinking about the positive.
As you do in life.
Yes.
You don't do that very well, by the way.
So the game I'm going to talk about first.
Sorry, I got the wind laugh.
Oh, that's awesome.
So what's your first game, Dave?
The game I'm going to talk about first is Quelf. Quelf is a game that doesn't really have a point to it. I think it's meant to be just a silly game in the first place. But I don't know. I don't generally play a lot of those games. And when I do, I don't know. There are some that are better than others. This is not one of those. Typically, strategy is my cup of tea, and this is not a game that strategy is going to do any good for you. I like the ability to come up with a legitimate plan I'm going to be able to count on to feel like I've done a good job at the end of the game. In fact, after playing any great game, I feel like I should be able to look back and see what I could have done differently to do better. And this is not that game. But one of my groups in Washington, we had some of the best laughs we have ever had playing this game. The game itself was universally hated. We were able to return to those laughs for a long time as we all kind of took turns sneaking that game into one of the other couple's kitchen cabinets or in their car or slid it under the bed in their bedroom. So we were always just kind of trying to just kind of get away with sneaking it in there so that they find it later and are like, what the? Because we all hated this game so bad. But that is Quelf.
All right, we're back to Logan. Logan, number 4.
4. Ever down.
I might have taken issue with this pick until the last SaltCon, and now I might be joining you on this one.
Oh, you repented of your thoughts, of your poor thoughts.
Because
It is possible to have a bad game of this, though. It really is.
Well,
It's a wonderful game. I
by
love
that,
Everdell,
you
but-
also, Millie Fiore is on that list for you too, especially after Cheryl's
Yeah.
sick burns.
Yeah, Cheryl really, she beat me bad and then was not nice about it.
Actually, I'm the one that beat you bad.
No,
And
you
she
both
just
did.
chose
No,
to
you both did.
rub in my score.
Yeah. Oh, it was Foundations of Rome that she.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, she was not nice in both cases. So
Yeah, she was having a high day that day.
Yeah,
That
it
she
was
was
awesome.
winning everything.
yeah, it
But
was
it
great.
goes back to like Nathan's experience of Cooper Island, where it's not necessarily that it was a bad play, but it was like my first experience with Everdell. It was just so awful. The season, it's worker replacements, and it doesn't end at the same time. So I ended like an hour and a half early before everybody else because I kept getting resources from all these other stuff that I didn't understand. Andy talked me into playing it again another time. Still didn't really like it, but arguably it is a better game than I feared it was. Don't want to play it again though. It just lasts way too long for a mediocre amount of fun.
I love Everdell, and we were playing it incorrectly. There was one rule we had wrong, so that's why the second time you played it, it was better. You probably would have, if you didn't have that tainted game the first time. You probably actually would have liked it, I think. But
Oh, it's totally possible. But I mean, like, I'm stubborn. Like, I have an opinion now.
there's no doubt about that. All right, my number 4 is one of Nathan's favorite games. I kind of feel like I went down everybody's top 5 list. Yeah, I hated that game, so I'm going to put it on here. But that was Attica. I've only played Attica once, and I really did not like it. After getting through the teach we played, I kind of jumped out of the gates and was doing really well. And the major flaw that I feel like that game has is as soon as someone starts doing well, it is gang up time. I think it would play great as a 2-player game, and I probably would enjoy it, but I have no desire to play it with more than 2 players ever.
It is a phenomenal 2-player game.
And that's the biggest reason is because that kind of spoiled it for me. It's the times I've seen it being played with multiple players, more than 2 players, the same thing has happened every single time where someone starts doing well and then everybody gangs up on them.
Yep. James Clark will follow your tune step for step. Yeah. Cause he felt he had a winning strategy, got to a point where he could win, and the whole table discussed how are we going to stop James. And then he found another path. And again, the discussion was how are we going to stop James? And after the 3rd time, he's like, all right, yeah, this game sucks.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was probably after the 2nd time, but he stayed through and finished the game. But yeah, no, it can be a sharp game for sure. A sharp game. I don't know if that's the right word there to use, but I mean, it can cut both ways for sure. That it can be a very good game at 2 players. But yeah, I think you're spot on. When you get into that higher player count, 3, 4, it just really becomes a pick on me game.
All right. Well, my number 4 is, this is a game that we played. It was actually about a year ago, and I was excited because I had not played it and I really wanted to learn it. I think it's at this point a classic in the board gaming hobby, and this was Power Grid. And we sat down and played it at Andy's house. I don't remember how many people were there, but there were 5 or 6. So I think right off the bat, there were too many people playing at the table, and it just took forever. I think Power Grid is a good system. It has some things that I really like about it, but it was too many people. This game of Power Grid took us 3.5 hours to get through. It was the entire game night. And I had a hard time getting over this idea that the rich get richer with this game. As we played it, I really did feel, I mean, you generate resources. The more resources you generate, the more you have to invest in creating more resources. And that cycle is just a rich get richer system, right? And it really played out that way in the game that we played, for sure. Yeah. And I did okay at it. In fact, I think it came down to a tiebreaker between Dave and I. So it was, it wasn't that I didn't do well. I was one of those rich that got richer, but that bugged me. I didn't like that mechanically about the play. And then just having that many people and having it last that long. We got done with Power Grid, and I was like, okay, I'm good with Power Grid. I'm done. That was my Power Grid experience, and I can walk away and never play it again. My number 4, Power Grid.
I'm kind of with you, Doug. Power Grid's not my favorite game. And I think it definitely falls into the category of just because it can play a high player count doesn't mean it should.
Yeah, no, 100% on that. It definitely.
Logan and I will agree with that with Firefly.
Oh, so much.
3, I think, is a nice number for Firefly. Probably the same goes for Power Grid.
Yeah, I think so. So that's my number 4. Nathan, what do you have for us?
So my number 4 is a fun game that we learned how to play at Icon this year. And that was a game called Golem. And it's kind of funny as we go through our top lists and the experiences that we have and the experiences that are related to it. A lot of mine are either A, my failure to learn the game, or B, the teacher's failure to teach the game. And this one is definitely the teacher failed to teach the game. One of the vendors was selling it there, and he's like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this. Had some interest in it for a while. And the guy's like, well, if you buy it, I'll teach you. And Andy's like, sold. And then as we were sitting there preparing how to learn this, it was very evident that the guy did not know how to teach the game.
He didn't know how to play the game.
Barely. Could say that he could play the game for sure.
Yeah, I was really wondering if this game was going to make your list, because he started doing the teach, and I was just like, I'm out. Yeah. And he did go and get somebody else who did a much better job.
A much better job.
But even halfway through that, at that point, it was so muddled, and I was just like, I'm done. I did not play that with you. And honestly, if I had, it would have made my list. Yeah. I am positive it would have made this list for me.
Yeah, it was definitely a struggle. And I mean, the stain was there on the game, put a sour taste in my mood. The game was very good, and I wouldn't mind playing it again, but that experience was very tough.
All right, Dave, what's your number 4?
My next game is a little card game called Bang. And really all I have to say about it is, Nathan, you've talked about your feelings for Tapestry as one of those games that you can take your turn and then wait around and wait around and wait around and wait around.
Bang can be just as bad, if not worse.
And yes, Bang, in almost every time I have played the game, it is way worse as far as that goes. But I think that's how any player elimination game can be, which is why player elimination is so far down on my list of game mechanics.
But you got really good at Madden football.
Yeah. I was really bummed when your little Xbox with Madden was no longer, or it wasn't actually Madden, it was at NCAA. But I was really bummed when that wasn't there any longer, because I was I invested so much time doing that when you guys were playing Bang that it was a little frustrating when I was like, oh man, I can't do that anymore.
Well, I have found that with both Bang and Bang the Dice game, the enjoyment of it can really swing between the two extremes. If you're with the right people in the right setting, both of those games can be phenomenal. And if you are with the wrong people in the wrong setting, they can be absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'll say it again, player elimination for me is just not my cup of tea. There are so many great games and great mechanics out there that it's very easy to completely avoid this mechanic. There's no reason to spend any time on those games that don't avoid it.
Yeah, I agree. And that brings us to number 3 for Logan. What you got for us?
Which is, it's actually a really bad experience with a really good experience, is viticulture. When we sat down to learn the game at SaltCon, and then there was like 3 people trying to teach the game all at once, it just like overwhelmed me. I had no idea what was going on. And so when the game got brought out later, it was like one of those tepid, like, okay, you can do this. You can do this. Sit down, and then teach went so much better. And I love the game. Viticulture is amazing. So it's just really that experience is on my list.
You had a little PTSD from that first time, huh?
Yeah, because I mean, that's the good and bad thing from, like, we broke it out at SaltCon. And so there's fans of board games everywhere. Like, it's great to be around that many fans of board games, but then some of them come around and insist because they like the game that you're playing that they're going to teach with the person that's teaching it.
Yeah, I can't remember if that was brought up on our pet peeves list.
It was.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
we
it
talked
was.
about
I'm
it.
sure it was.
That, yeah, more than one person teaching a game. Oh, nothing drives me more insane.
Yep. It is. It's ridiculous.
This is another one. I was really curious to see if this experience would make it onto somebody's list, because viticulture is wonderful. Viticulture is a fantastic game. Great game.
I would love to
that
stop and play it
particular
right now.
session. Yeah, that session of it was just awful, and it had to do with the teach and 3 people talking over each other. 4 if you include me. I mean, it was, I was
Who
trying.
was supposed to be teaching?
I was the one supposed to be teaching. Yeah, and I had helpers.
Which it was actually probably good for my experience of playing viticulture, because it is a really good game that we just kind of boxed it back up and went to lunch like right after that.
Yeah.
Because then I didn't have like the Everdell experience or something, right? Where it was tainted by.
Everybody needed a Snickers after that.
Pretty much.
I needed more than that.
In fact, I ended
strong whiskey or something.
I ended up picking it up because it was a game that Sierra she's like, that game looks really fun, but I had no idea what was going on. And that was probably one of her worst, if not her worst game experiences, was that teach of viticulture. It was terrible. So yeah, I definitely can understand where you're coming from there.
Hey, I'm really excited to hear Andy's number 3.
Number 3, drum roll.
Because, I'm expecting shenanigans to ensue. Maybe even a little throwdown right here on the tabletopper.
Number 3 is Seafall. What a crappy game.
What a crappy game. I love that game.
I'm so happy I dodged it.
It's not that crappy of a game, but the imbalances in that game, it just made it frustrating to play. I guess I have high expectations for games. There's enough games out there, and the industry's not new anymore, right? Imbalances like that should be designed out of the game. And I get that they want you to progress the game and explore and everything else, but why have any of the other stuff that you can do when it's forcing you into a specific direction in order to score the most points? I like the fact that it's multifaceted and there's lots of ways to score points, but there's one way to score a lot of points. And that was the part I disliked about it, and it kind of ruined the game for me.
Yeah, and I think the reason they did it that way was because as the games progress, the amount of points threshold that you need to win increases. And if they didn't have those high points for the milestones, the games would just take forever to progress. And so I think to alleviate that was keep the point score down and, just make the milestones 1 or 2 points instead of the 4 points or, 4 points. And then if you were successful at completing the test, then it was 5 points. And then if you read something out of the book, that made it even more points. So yeah, I mean, I'd see your frustration with it for sure, but I really wish you would have played it through completion. I really think seeing that game all the way through is of benefit.
You think it would change my mind?
I hope so. I would think so, because I mean, I kept telling you were on the cusp of turning and becoming the leader of the game, but we'll never know.
So not true.
I very much think it was.
You said that 2 games prior, and it so didn't happen. So.
You were very close both of those last 2 games.
I think it was sweet lies to get you to the table both times.
This is what I'm talking about. The throwdown right here.
I was just going to say, one of the 3 of us has seen the game beyond that point, so they might.
I've played this game 36 times. That was a Gloomhaven.
Oh, that was Gloomhaven.
It took me a second.
Like, you haven't played it that much.
I was like,
what?
No. Oh, Gloomhaven. Yep.
Anyway, Seafall, that's my number 3.
Allowed.
My number 3 was a game that I was really excited to try because I had heard a lot of great things about it. There are a lot of people who really love this game. I think it still gets a decent amount of playtime, and it's somewhere, I think, on the top 100 of the BGA all time, I believe. This was Fury of Dracula. I didn't play this with you guys. This was with a different gaming group before I had joined Meeple Nation. But we sat down and played this, and I will just say this. It seemed like just a whole lot of fun for the person who got to play Dracula. And for the hunters, which I was one of the hunters, it was just boring. 2 actions per turn and 1 turn every, 15, 20 minutes. And yeah, it just did not land at all. The hidden movement mechanism and the way that works in this game just did not work for me. If you are the Dracula player, you're doing something all the time. And if you're a hunter, granted, there's a lot of conversation at the table if you want to be successful hunting Dracula, but you're not really doing anything. You spend a lot of time discussing, and then you've got a couple limited actions and goes back to Dracula to do more cool stuff. So maybe I'd have a different opinion about it if I'd played Dracula, but as a hunter, I will never play this game again.
I agree with you, Doug, because it felt like every time when you're the hunter, because I've only played the game as the hunter, it just sucks because like when you actually find Dracula, you're like most of the time like halfway across the map, and then you're trying to get there, but then Dracula's already like trying to ditch out of the area. So it's just such a long walk for such a short drink. That's what Fury of Dracula was.
That's a really good way of putting it, actually. That's exactly how it felt.
Yeah, I think the game appeals to specific people, right? I mean, we talk about player elimination, how that shines for some people and less so for others. I think a game like this, Letters to Whitechapel, Spectre Ops, all of those games work really well if you have a group that is willing to discuss and not get upset when somebody doesn't agree with their opinion. If you have a group that is willing to openly strategize together, then it doesn't feel like you're just taking your turn and doing nothing, or that you're just taking that walk across the board. But if you can get that group that is working together and becoming a think tank and playing well together, there is a ton of strategy in those games. And yeah, you might be walking off trying to feel like you're by yourself, but as a whole, I mean, you have to understand that you're playing as a group, and it's the group wins together. Even though Andy goes in and kills all the bad guys in Shadows of Brimstone, my team still wins. I have a role to play. That role is just not killing monsters.
This is cheerleading.
It's just cheerleading.
Should have been a pack horse.
Well, as far as games like this go, like I prefer Fury of Dracula. I don't mind it. Obviously, playing Dracula is way more fun than the Hunters. I think it's too long, but it's way better than Letters to Whitechapel. I really didn't enjoy that game at all. Obviously, the theme's different. I don't know if the theme grabbed me more with Fury of Dracula over Letters to Whitechapel, or if it was the powers of Jack in Letters of Whitechapel that I didn't care for, that made it just, something just rubbed me wrong about that game. Whereas Fury of Dracula, I other than the length, I actually enjoy it. But I just think it depends on, I think Nathan's right. It just depends on the group. And I think it depends on the length of the game itself. If you can get turns played quickly, and I mean, part of that's discussing it at the table, but get through the discussion quickly, decide what you're doing, and then get through the turns quickly. I think that can make or break your experience with it.
Well, in my case, it broke it. So Fury of Dracula, and because they're so similar, I've heard they're so similar, Letters to Whitechapel, 2 games I'll probably never play. So that's why it made this list. That was my number 3.
So my number 3 goes back to another rules teach. And this is a game called Sapiens. And actually, I don't really have much good to say about the game at all. But because my experience was very, very tainted. The teacher of the game was not doing a very good job at teaching the game, and then used the opportunity to, as they were taking turns, saying, "Oh, this is a real big jerk move, but I'm going to do it anyways." And so I'm like, okay. And then the second time something like that happened, I'm like, all right, what do we have to do to end this game? Because I have no interest in this game whatsoever. And it feels like you have something vindictive against me, but maybe they did. But yeah, Sapiens made my list just because, again, going back to that bad teach. And if you're teaching somebody new to a game, demolishing somebody is not it's not the way to enhance anybody's gaming experience.
Unless you're a Mara.
Unless you're a Mara, yeah.
All right, so my next game is going to get some hate, I'm sure, so I will pre-apologize. It is the game of Werewolf.
Golf clap. I'm clapping.
And I mean, really, any of the games that are of this ilk for me. But Werewolf specifically. The first time I played Werewolf was at SaltCon. It was a game that Meeple Nation was running, and I was like, all these people love this so much, and tell me about how fun it is, and so I get there and we start, and right at the very beginning, first time somebody's supposed to be killed by, not like by the regular, like by the villagers, but like by, I don't even know what the role was, but some little girl, she was probably like 6 or 7 years old, had the role of that she just killed somebody during the night or whatever. And the person running the game was like, well, you just have to choose somebody, like just pick, it doesn't matter, just pick. And so she looks around the circle and was like, him. And I was like, oh, okay. Oh, this is a bang again. Right?
Yeah, where's that Xbox?
Right. Now, luckily, because I was actually looking forward to playing with some of the people who were playing Werewolf, but luckily some other friends of mine were not playing Werewolf, so I was able to go, and when they finished their game, I was able to jump in another game with them.
I actually think that's why a game like this works, especially at a convention. You can go and play, and while you're playing and you're in, I think it's interesting and enjoyable. And then as soon as you get eliminated, you can just go find a game to play back in the hall. And so in that regard, I will say that I think it works. At a convention, games like Werewolf and Blood on the Clock Tower, I think that they actually work quite well. They're not really my cup of tea, but I do think that they work. But I can definitely see that being a bad experience, especially if it's just some random, thing that somebody says or does that's just like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not playing anymore.
Right. So it's saving grace for a game like this, though, is I do enjoy seeing the people that I care about have so much fun.
I have had a ton of fun not playing this game, but watching this game being played. In particular, the last time I watched this game being played, I showed up right for the last 5 minutes of the game,
It
was probably the best experience of Werewolf I've ever had in my life. Right, Nathan?
Yeah, you're a jerk.
I was actually going to say, out of all the games I've ran for SaltCon and Nathan, who ran it before me, how many people stick around for that extra hour and a half after being eliminated just to watch it? Kind of baffles me sometimes, why they just don't go off and find a game, come back later to get highlights.
Dave Bremer.
Yeah, it's the experience.
Oh yeah, Dave cuddled up and cried in Cat's lap this last SaltCon.
Well, when you have guys like Dave Bremer that make it interesting and enjoyable, right? I can see why people stop and are going to watch and see what happens. And I mean, I can totally get that. And like I said, I've had way more fun watching it and seeing people's defenses and arguing and everything else. To me, that's way more fun, knowing all the information and seeing how people are playing the game than actually playing the game.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Enjoy seeing like in particular, when I've seen my boys or my wife when she's got to play Salem with the ladies from Hug, just some of those experiences and watching all of them. And for that matter, the Hug ladies, they have so much fun with these games and it's fun watching them.
So we're down to our number 2s. Logan, what'd you got?
Terraforming Mars, which maybe since it's been a while, I would have a different opinion coming back to it. But when it was hitting the table with our game group, the people that were playing it, so much more, I don't want to say smart than I am, but they were. But it's just like their capacity for memory for like these games is just astonishing to me. Like I can't wrap my brain around it. That they can memorize like all 1,200 cards and like the best combo for everything all together. And I'm just playing the game trying to like limp along and put together a strategy. And they're like, oh, why didn't you play this card? Going in with such a handicap with that game is just, it's not fun. It's rough.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you on that. And part of that is that if you played with the same people that I was playing with, then they played that game all the time.
You guys keep looking at David.
I wasn't actually, but
I think we're making sweet eye contact.
But it was when you play that game as often as like Dennis and Ryan and Corey and Dave do, or did at least at that point in time, you do come in at a huge handicap. I mean, we've talked about my experience with Terraforming Mars many times on the podcast, and it was a really, really bad, rough experience. More rough experience than probably any other experience I've had.
So let me throw this out there. How do you think the game would be different for somebody like you, or maybe even Logan yourself, if there was no draft?
I would like it more because it would speed it up, and I think I would like it even more if you took all the blue action cards out.
I think drafting in particular is what ruins this game. I look back at games like Res Arcana, anything where you're drafting those games and you're drafting those games with somebody who is far more familiar with the game than the novice player. Drafting is a huge handicap to the new player.
I would agree.
Huge handicap.
For sure. Absolutely.
I mean, like worst case, it just makes the game last so much longer because the new players trying to read and understand cards where the new players are like, oh, yep, I got this card. I'm going to look for these type of cards. Yeah.
Well, and I get why you would want to have the draft because it helps you build that engine and get those cool combos that are in the game. But you're right, Nathan, that puts such a handicap on anybody who's less familiar with everything, that all the different combos you can get are specific cards and what they do and what you want to look for.
Yeah, I think back to the time that I won Res Arcana, and I won it playing against Doug. And Doug's like, well, we should do it with a draft. And then I never won it again. And so, I mean, there's that advantage. I mean, I came close, and I wasn't a total novice player, but there was a strict advantage from somebody who had played the game far more familiar. And, I look at Richie and even Dave playing, Richie and Porter played that game dozens of times. And so to play that game with them and draft, the game is, it becomes dull and annoying.
I think there are a bunch of games like this, though, that really require players to play with people who are on the same level as them. In order for everyone at the table to enjoy it, you really need to be playing with people who have played it roughly the same number of times and have the same familiarity with the game. And I also think that the onus is kind of on the person teaching it. If you are more familiar and you're introducing it to new players, to be aware that things like a draft may ruin the game. And you need to take time to make sure that the people at the table are enjoying that first experience that they have with it. That's one thing about games like Res Arcana and Terraforming Mars and even Arc Nova and more recently Revive, I discovered, is that people who like those types of games don't really like to take it easy on the people they teach them to. And it's a huge problem. If you are really into those games and you want other people to play with you and enjoy those games, don't destroy them the first time you play. Don't play all the blue cards. Don't try to get your highest score on the first game that you play with these people. You know what I mean? I think we all need to do better at that. I caught myself doing that with Revive at SaltCon this last year, and I've definitely had those experiences. I mean, Dennis, and I love Dennis, but the first time he taught us Arc Nova, I mean, he destroyed us. Absolutely mopped the floor. And it almost, if the game wasn't just a really, really fantastic game, it probably would have maybe even made this list. I mean, it would not have been a game that I wanted to play again. And so sometimes overcoming that barrier is huge, and we all need to be more aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why Ark Nova is on my list. It's probably not one I'm going to talk about, but it's one of my 14 games, Dave. But yeah, Ark Nova is, I mean, because that's exactly the reason. I mean, I played with somebody who'd played several times, and every time I've played with people who very much enjoy the game, and I'm not trying to take anything away from their enjoyment of the game, but their level of the game versus my level of the game was just going through the motions, right? I'm just going through the motions because I'm getting no enjoyment out of the game.
See, I have a totally different perspective with that, right?
Of course you do, Dave. Of course you do.
Like when I get trounced by, we'll go back to Terraforming Mars, right? Like the only time I played it was with people you're talking about, right? Like Dennis and Corey and Ryan and these people who played it a lot more than me. I like to look at it, and this is one of the things that I do throughout a game like this. I'm like, hey, how did you do that? How did you do that? Because I'm trying to learn and figure out what, you know what I mean? What things, so that I can, again, like go back to what I said at the very beginning of the podcast with the first game I talked about. Like, I want to be able to review what I did, what I could have done better. And so, yeah, I was getting just totally spanked over and over and over again. And then I got to the point where I'm like, okay, now we're flowing. So for me, I don't know. I can't think of a time where a game experience was ruined by that type of thing, right? But again, that's me, right? Like that's and everybody has their different.
Yeah, and I would just say I think that's a little bit more of an outlier, if I'm being totally honest, because I mean, all of us have games on our list that are like that, you know. And if we were to go to a top 10, top 15, I'm willing to bet that probably the majority of our games might even be because we got taught by people who really knew the game incredibly well, and it just was a bad experience playing against somebody who could just destroy us. So that's awesome, and I think we should probably all try to be like that a little bit more, but yeah, I don't think most people are like that. And if you're teaching a game, I think that's the big thing for me, because I teach a lot of games. If I'm teaching a game, that's something I want to be much better at and be aware of.
For sure.
All right, number 2. My number 2 is a game called Glyph. Nathan Tenney was kind enough to teach us Glyph at SaltCon. Unfortunately, he really wasn't very familiar with the game, so we really kind of stumbled through it. He was hoping that, if I'm not mistaken, he's hoping someone was going to be there to teach us.
I don't really remember.
I don't remember either.
Yeah, no, he didn't know how to play the game, so we spent more time reading the rules.
Yeah, and once we got playing, it was really long turns. It I mean, it seemed like it had potential. I mean, the art was really cool on it and had some high points, but overall, it was just a really terrible experience, and I had no desire to go back to it.
Seems like a common theme, right? Like just the teach and the
right.
You know, and again, this is a game that Nathan and I we looked at it together at a previous SaltCon, and we're like, oh, it looks kind of cool. So he bought it, but he hadn't really read it and gotten familiar with it before we tried to get through it.
And I think at that point, you know, if I would have gone in with that expectation of, okay, it's going to be a slug, that would have been different.
Right.
You know, knowing, okay, we don't know the rules, we're going to slug through the rules and learn the game. Okay. And I'm coming in knowing that that's going to happen.
Because we've done that before, right? We've pulled a game off the shelf and we're like, okay, hey, we're going to go through this, we're going to do it. And yeah, if you have that expectation up front, that makes for a far different experience as opposed to, hey, if you buy Golem, I'll teach you how to play it. Oh, wait, I don't know how to play it.
Right.
Good pick. My number 2 is a game called Perseverance Castaway Chronicles. Nathan, this was a game that you had kickstarted, if I'm not mistaken, and you had sent it home, I believe, with Corey.
Correct.
And he learned the rules and was excited, showed up at game night and wanted to teach us. And so we sat down and played this game, and I got about 20 minutes in and immediately had huge regret. This game, and I'll tell you what it was. It was the disappointment factor for me. This game was just loaded with disappointment. The box looks fantastic. The art's amazing. The components are cool. Has all these little dinosaurs that you're supposed to be fighting, right? That was kind of the promise, was dinosaurs are attacking your beachfront. You know, you're trying to establish this beachfront kind of outpost, and they're attacking. You got to defend. You got to gather resources. You know, it kind of had this almost kind of survival theme that I was really excited to dive into. I mean, I was really stoked to get this game to the table, and I was really glad that Corey had gone and learned the rules, and he did a great job teaching and everything. And we got into this, and it was just like boring worker placement, resource management. and it just felt so ho-hum. And the dinosaurs, like, they do attack kind of, you just kind of lay them out on this grid, and then you just kind of have to have that grid covered. It's been so long, I don't remember exactly how the mechanisms work, but I was so disappointed. It just crushed me because I wanted to like it so much, and it just wasn't fun.
So there was that old video game where you're the bartender and you have all the patrons that are coming down like the 5 different bars, and you have to fill a drink, slide it down the bar to make them happy and go away so that the line doesn't back up. That's how this game felt.
Yeah.
You had the dinosaurs that were coming down, and as long as you didn't take care of the dinosaurs, you were just running back and forth from the lines to make sure you're maintaining the dinosaurs.
Yep. And it felt very, very underwhelming given what it promised. The size of the box, the coolness of the components, the art, everything else that I mentioned. Just given what seemed to be the promise of that game, the gameplay just did not meet expectations for me. I was really disappointed. So my number 2, Perseverance, Castaway Chronicles.
So my number 2 was another story involving Corey. Corey had gone to Japan where this family was living and bought a game, brought it back, taught us this game, Tiger and Dragon. I really, really enjoyed this game. It wasn't available for US release. So that's why it made my list, is that Corey taught us this really good game and then took it to New Jersey with him. But months later,
Corey.
I know.
So you regret being talked into playing this game because it was awesome, and now you can't play it?
And now I can't play it. Yeah. But funny thing is, when I made this list, that was the reason I put it on there. But it's actually upcoming for a US release in the next few months. And so I can take it off my list. But it made my list for that reason. So it had to be a little bit different for a reason it made it. But Tiger and Dragon is a great tile placement game steeped in the Japanese culture. It has kind of like the mahjong tiles that you're using. Very enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to getting my copy of that.
Yeah, he brought this over to game night once, and I was there when he taught it and we played it, and I really enjoyed it too. So if we're going to get a copy of that soon, that would be awesome. I like this game a lot.
All right, Dave, number 2.
I am going to take a page out of Andy's book and do a favorite of some of the people at the table. I just pulled a Logan as well by looking away from my mic and fading out.
Yes, you did.
So I'm going to take a page out of Andy's book and pick a favorite of some of y'all here at the table. And we're going to talk about Shadows of Brimstone.
I already talked about that one. Carry on.
But it's kind of a combination of Andy's and Logan, and Doug's previous reasonings. I feel like Shadows of Brimstone is probably the most imbalanced game that I can think of. It's imbalanced in a different way, right? Like, so Andy, you talked about imbalance with Seafall, and that's a competitive game, right? And imbalance there can sting quite a bit, but then it's imbalanced in the same way that Doug was talking about the imbalance of folklore feeling. And I feel that way worse in Shadows. But not always, right? Like I've seen, and even when just looking around the table at everybody's characters, right? Some characters are just way, way better than others. And so if you happen to pick a good one, sweet. If you don't, then, well, that sucked. I'll give it another try and see if it's any better the next time we play. And if it's not, then, well, I'll try again the next time. And anyway, that's just kind of how I
actually totally agree with you, Dave, on this. It's true. The first time that I played Shadows, I was like the sheriff or something. I was a cowboy, a gunslinger of some sort, right? And I had the same experience Nathan was talking about, where I felt like I was just cheerleading the leaders of the group. It had a lot to do with movement. So Shadows of Brimstone relies really heavy on being able to move and keep up with the group from round to round. And if you can't keep up movement-wise, you're going to fall behind and have, I think, a little bit of a lesser experience. And I would love to see them introduce something that balances that just a little bit, because I definitely had that experience. The last time we played it, I was the samurai, I think, is what I'm currently playing in our current game. And I'm loving the samurai. And he was a little slow at first, but I've worked his movement up. I've leveled that up a little bit. And now I can go into the rooms and hack and slash with the best of them. And it's a lot of fun, but I can definitely see it having that problem.
You know, and as far as that goes, and I'm going to say a swear word for Nathan right now, but I think those are things that house rules can mitigate and remedy. The way movement works is you roll a die and that's your movement.
Hold your tongue.
that's your movement, right? Is you roll a die and okay, I have 2 movement. And then if you have any bonus movement, you add it to that. And maybe you roll 2 dice and you pick which one you want to keep or something like that, right? I think there are ways to get around some of that.
It doesn't help when you're adding like 9 to your dice roll.
I don't add 9, I add 5. But yes, you're right.
It doesn't feel like that. and I'm like one of the more MVP players when it comes to Shadow too.
Yeah, and that's the particular character I'm playing is built around everything. All of her abilities are based on movement and moving around the board and getting bonuses.
And we have made a couple of house rules that definitely have helped.
You keep using that H word.
But I still have that same feeling.
Sure.
Well, you get to fill it again on Friday.
So I mean,
maybe Dave and I are. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Maybe Dave and I will pick something else and go play it at the end of the table.
So I mean, I really enjoy Shadows of Brimstone, and I was looking forward to our rehash of that at BGG this last time. But that was right when my diabetes kicked in, and I was really sick, and so I mean, I missed that game, and I think that fear of missing out, right, where I missed out on that next leg of the campaign. So I mean, I kind of compiled that with even if I was carrying the lantern and I could go one way to make everybody follow me so I could be in the lead for one turn. And, but yeah, no, I mean, all that compiled to my lack of interest in Shadows.
One of the other things, and I'll just mention this really quick, I think that Shadows is better at a lower player count. And I really like Shadows, to be clear. Fantastic game. I really do like playing it. But like we were talking about before we hit the record button, I think we've got some extra people who wanted to come play Shadows for one of our next game nights. And if we've got that many people around the table, I would probably bow out.
It's definitely one that's better at 3 or 4.
Correct. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
I don't know. We rocked it pretty good with just the two of us.
That's true. All right. So number 1, Logan.
It's more of a type of experience than it is an actual game. So it's either I'm in last place and people are picking on me, or it's like a cooperative game where the only semi-cooperativeness happens to be against me at like some random point. So like Lizard Wizard, where we're playing that, and young Logan played that one spell card that like Swazi's the only time it picked me is when it was with that card and like screwed me out of like 12 victory points. Or like Lydia at BryceCon, where we're all growing trees, we're all really happy, and we're being very cooperative with it, and then she picks on me and I'm like, "Arr."
Oh, was that with Forests of Pangaea?
Yeah.
We need to play that again. That was a good game.
It was a good game. I wouldn't mind it, especially with Lydia, because I like giving her crap about that stuff. But then also like at BGG, where I was already in last place, looking to score at least something in my last turns, and Nathan's just like, no, I must defeat Stranger Man that's playing with us. I'm going to take away all your points.
And I still lost.
Yeah, so those types of experiences just like, oh, they sour me on that experience so much sometimes. I mean, they're fun to like tease people about later, but in the moment, it's like, really, dude? Like, really? Yeah.
Yeah, what was the name of the game we played at Hug a Meeple Con, where you played the cards to vote people out to kill them or whatever? What was that called? Do you remember? It was like the very first card game we played of the con.
Yeah, it was
Dead Last.
Dead Last. Okay. The experience that you're describing was my experience playing that. It was like I was getting eliminated and was not doing well at all, and it was just constant being picked on, and the leaders just ran away with it.
I can definitely see how that would be frustrating, and I would agree with you. Those kinds of experiences.
I mean, like, we took those cards out of Lizard Wizard after that, and
we did.
Yeah.
That was why the reason why. Yeah.
That is. And you know what? The game's better for it, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Okay, so my number 1 we have discussed already, and that is Terraforming Mars. It will be difficult to trump that experience in my book because it was really bad.
When we decided to do this episode, I knew that was going to be your number 1 pick.
Unsurprising.
You talked about it a significant amount of times, and yeah, it sounds like it was a really bad experience.
I had a glimmer of hope that it might be at least like number 2 or 3.
Well, so it got to 2 on mine and 1 on Andy's, so therefore it's really, really terrible.
And I honestly thought C-File was going to be your number 2.
Not quite.
What about you, Doug?
Well, my number 1 is also one we have already talked about, and that was Glyph. That was not a pleasant experience at all. Probably it was my least favorite gaming experience that I got talked into. It was at a convention. It took up a bunch of time of the convention. It was not fun. I drug my daughter into it. Like, she wanted to play, and so she joined me. Amberly joined me, and she had a miserable time and was basically falling asleep on my arm. And yeah, the game just didn't offer any real excitement. The only thing that I'll add from our previous conversation is just this. This was the game that taught me I do not want to sit down and learn rules as a group before we play a game. And so for that, I am grateful. It taught me that lesson. It solidified it in my brain. And ever since that experience with Glyph, I do not want to sit down and learn a game as a group. And I know you guys have talked about doing that before. I'm out. Somebody needs to learn it and somebody needs to come prepared to teach it. And everyone will have a better experience at the table if it's done that way. This group learning and group going through the rule book before a game, I'm out. That just does not work for me. And that's a Doug thing. I get it. Some groups do that. Some people love that. Not for me.
I think it would definitely depend on the complexity of the game.
For sure.
Like going in, you know that this is like a more intense game. And you're like, no, somebody needs to learn it. Somebody needs to teach it. And some games, like we almost did that with Distillery a couple weeks ago. I know, Andy, you read through the rules. Oh, Distilled. Sorry. Distilled. But you read through the rules before while we were playing another game. But I mean, there was quite a bit of like, oh, I'm not sure. Let me look that up real quick. But I mean, overall, it was actually a very simple game to sit down and play.
Yeah, and I'll just say this, even that's different. Even that is different. Somebody read the rule book, somebody was familiar with 90%, and then if you've got to go in and reference the rule book for a few things as you're playing as a group, no problem. But this idea that we're going to sit down from scratch as a group and learn a game, no, not for me.
For me, sometimes that makes it, and honestly, I feel the opposite. I like to do those on the more complex games because they're so complex. Having multiple people there to try to figure them out can be super beneficial if you have people that don't mind doing it, right? Because it allows you to hash through it and like, let's figure this out because the rules are kind of complex or they may be ambiguous or something like that. To have that extra set of eyes on the game on trying to figure out how to play can be really beneficial. And especially the newer games like Kickstarter games, when there aren't any really how to play videos, that can be really helpful as
okay,
well.
but I'm going to ask you this because I know, for example, you and Dave did that with Aeon's Trespass Odyssey, right? But that was a sleeving, getting things organized, learning how to play session. You guys weren't sitting down to actually play it, or if you were, it was maybe the tutorial, right?
Right.
So like honestly, how often do you sit down as a group and it's like, we're going to play this game. This is the game we're playing, but we're going to start from scratch reading the rule book?
Not very often. I mean, it's happened several times. It's happened several times with my wife. We've done that several times here on Nathan's game nights. We've pulled a game out but they haven't been super complex games. So you're not 3 hours trying to hash through rules. So that can kill an experience for sure. If it's a really long rules teach and half the people are on their phones and not really even learning the game.
Yeah.
You know, that can totally destroy any positive experience that may have been had.
So my first year that I went to BGG, I was wandering around trying to find a game while everybody else had something going on. And I found some people that had an open seat for Thunderstone Quest. And so I was like, hey, can I join you? And they're like, yeah. And so they're sitting down and they're doing exactly that. They are reading the rules. One person is reading aloud the rules for everybody. And so I interrupted and I was like, I know how to play this game. I can teach it if you want. And they're like, no, we prefer to read this together. And so I'm like, okay. So I sat through them reading the rules. And then when they would have a question and I would try to clarify it, they would not listen to me whatsoever. They had to go find it in the rule book on their own. And so palm on the forehead many times. But I sat through and they were actually a very lovely group of people and the game went well. It took way too long.
I was going to say, like, as soon as they would say that, I probably would have been like, I'm going to dip.
Yeah.
Like, no hard feelings, but this is con. I've paid to be here. I'm not going to sit here for an extra hour as we read the rules together as a group.
Yeah.
But like Doug pointed out, right? Like to each his own. And this is not the way Doug wants to do it. At the con, I've seen a lot of people doing that.
Yeah.
And they do it. And I think it's normal for them. And they, right? Like that's just how they do it. And it works. And it's
Dave
great.
and Tammy do that every SaltCon. They'll find a game, take it off, read the rules together, play it.
And that's awesome, but just not for me.
Yep. And I think that's easier to do with a lower player count. You know, two people sitting down and hashing through is a little easier than everybody paying attention in a 4 or 5 player game and trying not to have your daughter fall asleep on your shoulder or anything like that. Because had we even, gotten through everything, then the people that weren't paying attention, it's like a whole new teach throughout the game, right? Oh no, it's like this, and it just extends the game that much longer. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Well, way to go, Doug, because I think we took 10 minutes discussing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take us down that side tangent. Nathan, what's your number one?
So my number one reveals a little bit of information about myself. I have some dyslexic issues, and so spelling has never been my strong suit.
Also, listening to him to read things is like one of my favorites.
Listening to me read things. Yeah,
Yes.
that's also one of the reasons I don't read the rules with an audience. Early on, and one of Dave's favorite games was a game called Boggle. And it still is called Boggle. Not past tense. It's still called Boggle. But this game was the worst. I hated this game. I hated it. Hated every experience of playing Boggle. And I probably played it like 50 times. And it was just, because the rest of the group really enjoyed it. The rest of the group doesn't have any dyslexic issues. The most miserable gaming experiences that I, for some reason, was a glutton for punishment and took it over and over and over again and said, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?"
I am feeling so much empathy right now.
I doubt it.
No, I'm serious. I really am, because I hate Boggle. I can't. I have a hard time spelling. I have my whole life. It's gotten way better as I've gotten older, but English is dumb because words aren't spelled the way they're supposed to be spelled.
You're not wrong.
Understatement of the year. Holy crap. I was
Preach.
thinking about that today when I was spelling something. I was like, oh my goodness, that is not how you say that word at all.
It's funny. This is actually a game that I had the same experience like we were talking about before. I showed up. This was in my very early days of coming to your game night, Nathan. But I showed up and we were playing Boggle, and I was like, okay. And Dennis destroyed everybody. But like early on, it took me several plays before I was being competitive with even the people in the second tier of scores. But eventually I got better, and I loved it. I loved it from the start. And again, part of that was like, I took that extra challenge. I want to beat Dennis. And I think that was partially because I knew it was going to bug him to no end if I beat him, because Dennis reads like crazy and he's just super, super, super smart. And in my family, I'm definitely the dumb guy. And so I just was going to have this great feeling of, I don't even know what to call it, but just if I could beat Dennis at this, I knew he was going to hate it so bad.
Spite.
And so
Greatest
eventually
feeling of spite.
And eventually I did. And yes, you're right. It is, I do love the game. But you could use past tense with Boggle, because when you do it right, it's either big Boggle or super big Boggle.
Super big waste of time.
All right, Dave, number 1.
Okay. I am going to close it out with Arkham Horror.
I love the game. I totally understand what you're about to say.
Now, with me at the table, we have to make the differentiation. We are not talking about the living card game.
I've still never played the living card game.
Yeah.
I don't know what to call it. It's just art to me. It's just Arkham Horror. When I hear it, I'm like, oh, really? Is that what we're gonna play? That one. and
Arkham
then
Horror, the board game.
the board game, and then the other like bigger one. I can't.
Eldritch Horror.
Eldritch Horror, the bigger board game. These.
Which is really surprising, because when you would visit from Washington, we would break it out in particular and play the game for like 9 hours.
Yeah.
You could have been playing 9 hours of Boggle.
Or
Yeah.
sleeping. It was like 5 in the morning when we get done.
I mean, I think there was a lot of sleeping going on, because when there's 10 people around the game and it takes about an hour for it to get back to your turn. And then once it gets back to your turn, you're like, hey, you still haven't explained the game to me. And they're like, well, it doesn't matter. You just have to do this. So, Arkham Horror for me.
That's a great choice to end the
Yeah,
series on.
it is. The board game is not good.
There's a lot of aspects of the game that I really enjoy and I miss because I don't get to play it anymore. But other games do that almost as well, if not better, than all the other issues I do have with that.
Cthulhu Death May Die. Way better.
Way better. It's an amazing game.
Living card game.
The living card game. Way better. Okay.
That's not a hat.
That is okay.
Way better.
I guess.
You know what? I'll give you that one.
I'm going to agree.
Never played it.
All right, and that has been our list of games that we really wish we had not been talked into playing. Until next time.
We'll see you walking away from the table because Boggle's a waste of time.
Thank you for listening and being a part of Meeple Nation. If you would be so kind as to follow, subscribe, share, and rate or review this podcast, it really helps to spread the fun. You can be more involved in supporting the podcast by joining the nation at patreon.com/MeepleNation, or you can find a link at the top of our webpage, meeplenation.com. And while you're there, Look at all our extra content. There are links to all our past episodes, a wide variety of blogs, pictures from our Instagram feed, and bios for all the hosts and our awesome bloggers. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all under Meeple Nation. If you would like to chat with the hosts or other members of the nation, you can join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. We hope to see you again at a game night, a con, or maybe a suspense-driven evening of Werewolf. Thank you for listening and supporting Meeple Nation, and stay tuned for next week's episode.
Thank you so much for listening. We very much want to thank our patrons who help keep the podcast running. I personally want to thank my co-hosts for all the help they provide with both content here on the podcast, in addition to what we have available on our website. Without them, the podcast would not happen. If you too would like to support the podcast, you can join the nation at patreon.com/Meeple_nation. Or you can find a link to Patreon at the top of our webpage, meeplenation.com. If you have any questions, comments, or games you feel should be on our radar, you can always reach us at meeplenation@gmail.com. We can't wait to hear from you. I am grateful to Doug and Andy who helped me edit episodes, and I want to thank James and Kim Clark who do the editing on our blogs and on our webpage, which can be found at meeplenation.com. We want to thank Brain Detergent for our music. If you want to find more from him, you can follow his links that can be found on our webpage, or simply search for Brain Detergent on YouTube to find more of his tracks. Thank you again for listening and being part of the Meeple Nation community.